You think you're being punished. Your plans collapsed. People walked away. Doors you begged Allah for stayed shut. You prayed, and instead of relief, life got heavier. So you started asking the dangerous question, what did I do wrong? Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If Allah wanted to punish you, He wouldn't be forcing you to grow. He would let you stay comfortable, distracted, and spiritually asleep. Allah doesn't break everyone. He breaks the ones He intends to rebuild properly. This pain is not random. This loss is not cruelty. This collapse is not abandonment. You're not being punished. You're being rebuilt. 1. Allah breaks the version of you that can't go higher. Allah never destroys what still has value. That's the first thing you need to understand, because most people misunderstand what breaking actually means. They think if something hurts, it must be punishment. That's shallow thinking. Allah is not emotional, impulsive, or cruel. He is precise. When He breaks something in your life, it's because that version of you cannot survive what you are asking for. You said you wanted growth. You said you wanted strength. You said you wanted elevation. But you were still carrying weaknesses that would collapse under pressure. Ego that needed praise. Faith that depended on ease. Confidence that only existed when people approved of you. Comfort that made you lazy in obedience. That version of you could not go higher. It would have broken anyway, just later, and in a much worse way. So, Allah intervenes early. What He breaks is not your worth. He breaks the false structures you built around yourself. The identity that was tied to people. The habits that numbed you instead of sharpening you. The relationships that fed your comfort but weakened your discipline. You call these things my life. Allah sees them as limitations. Pressure is how Allah reveals reality. Under ease, everything looks fine. Weak faith feels strong. Fragile character looks stable. Shallow patience pretends to be deep. But when pressure comes, the truth surfaces. That's why Allah applies pressure, not to crush you, but to expose what cannot hold weight. Think about it clearly. If nothing had fallen apart, you would have stayed the same. You would have kept postponing change. You would have kept telling yourself, one day. You would have kept negotiating obedience. You would have kept living below your potential while believing you were progressing. Comfort lies. Stability hides decay. Allah does not raise unchanged people. Elevation requires transformation, and transformation requires friction. You cannot climb higher with the same mindset that kept you stuck. You cannot carry weak discipline into a life that demands strength. You cannot hold on to validation seeking while being prepared for responsibility. This is why things break suddenly. Not gradually, not politely. Allah removes illusions fast because slow removal allows excuses. Sudden collapse forces honesty. It forces you to face yourself without distractions, without backup plans, without false confidence. And here's the part most people avoid admitting. Some things had to be taken from you because you would never have let go willingly. You were too attached. You romanticized what was hurting you. You defended what was weakening you. So Allah removed it without asking your permission. That is not cruelty. That is mercy disguised as loss. When Allah breaks a version of you, He is saying, this identity cannot enter the next stage. This mindset will sabotage you. This attachment will destroy you later. This comfort will keep you small. The breaking hurts because you confuse familiarity with value. Just because something was familiar doesn't mean it was good for you. Just because it lasted doesn't mean it deserved permanence. Allah breaks the version of you that relied on external stability instead of internal discipline. He breaks the version of you that prayed only when life was easy. He breaks the version of you that talked about trust, but panicked when control was lost. And once that version cracks, something important happens. You become honest. You stop performing faith and start practicing it. You stop pretending to be strong and actually become strong. You stop asking for elevation without preparation. This is where rebuilding begins, not when life feels better, but when illusion dies, when ego is humbled, when dependence shifts from creation to the Creator. The breaking is not the end. It is the proof that Allah intends to take you somewhere higher, but only after removing what would have made you fall from that height. 2. Loss is how Allah creates space. Most people think loss means Allah is taking something away from them. That's a shallow and emotional interpretation. Loss is not subtraction. Loss is clearance. You ask Allah for more strength, more provision, more clarity, more elevation. But you don't look at what's already occupying your hands, your heart, and your mind. Allah doesn't pour into containers that are already full of attachment, distraction, and illusion. So before He gives, He empties. This is where people get it wrong. They think, if Allah loved me, He would add to my life. But often, love looks like removal. Allah takes away what you depended on more than Him. He removes relationships that replace trust in Him. He removes routines that kept you comfortable but spiritually weak. He removes plans that would have trapped you in a smaller future. And when those things disappear, it feels like collapse because your sense of security was built on them. What you call loss is often Allah preventing future destruction. You weren't strong enough yet to hold what you were asking for. If Allah gave it to you in your current state, it would either corrupt you or break you completely. So He delays the gift and first removes the obstacles inside you. Think honestly. Some things only became visible as problems after they were gone. While they were in your life, you defended them. You justified them. You ignored the damage they were doing. Only after Allah removed them did clarity come. That's not coincidence. That's design. Allah creates space because growth requires room. You cannot rebuild in a crowded structure. You cannot elevate while carrying excess weight. You cannot move forward while dragging attachments that anchor you to the past. Loss forces detachment. Detachment forces reliance. Reliance forces growth. This is why Allah sometimes removes people before removing pain. He removes money before removing anxiety. He removes stability before giving direction. Because if those supports stayed, you would never turn inward, never reassess, never change. People say they want a better life, but they resist the process required to reach it. They want outcomes without restructuring. Allah does not work like that. He doesn't decorate broken foundations, He clears them. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Some losses hurt because they expose how misplaced your trust was. You didn't lose just a thing. You lost what you were leaning on. And when that support vanished, you realized how fragile your footing really was. Allah lets that feeling linger for a reason. He wants you to understand that nothing created is meant to hold your heart permanently. Anything you depend on too heavily becomes a liability. Anything you trust more than Allah eventually gets removed. This is not because Allah is harsh, but because He is protective. You see loss as emptiness. Allah sees it as preparation. You see absence. Allah sees capacity being created. You see doors closing. Allah sees space being cleared for doors you're not ready to recognize yet. But here's the condition. Space only becomes preparation if you don't rush to fill it with the same mistakes. Many people lose something, feel the pain, and immediately replace it with another distraction, another attachment, another illusion. They sabotage the lesson and then wonder why the cycle repeats. Loss is only beneficial if it leads to awareness. When Allah takes something away, He is asking you to reassess what you value, what you rely on, and what you worship in practice, not just in words. If you learn the lesson, the space becomes a foundation. If you ignore it, the loss returns in another form. Allah does not empty you to leave you hollow. He empties you to rebuild you correctly. Space is not abandonment. Space is opportunity. And what fills that space next depends entirely on whether you learned why it was created. 3. Silence from Allah is not rejection. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that Allah's silence means Allah is displeased. That assumption comes from weak understanding and emotional thinking, not faith. Silence is not rejection. Silence is assessment. When Allah answers immediately, faith feels easy. Du'as flow. Patience feels natural. Trust sounds convincing. But instant answers don't test sincerity. They don't separate real reliance from emotional dependence. Silence does. Allah becomes silent when He wants to see what you do without reassurance. Do you still pray when nothing changes? Do you still obey when relief doesn't arrive? Do you still trust when you don't understand? Most people's faith collapses here. They were attached to outcomes, not obedience. They wanted results, not refinement. So when Allah delays, they panic. They overthink. They complain. They assume abandonment. In reality, Allah is watching closely. Silence is where your true relationship with Allah is exposed. If Allah spoke back every time you felt discomfort, you would never grow internal strength. You would rely on emotional comfort instead of discipline. You would obey for rewards, not out of submission. That kind of faith is fragile. It collapses the moment life becomes heavy. So Allah withholds reassurance, not because He doesn't care, but because He cares enough to strengthen you. Think clearly. Teachers don't help during the exam. Silence doesn't mean the teacher disappeared. It means the test has begun. And the test is not about whether you get what you want. It's about whether you remain who you claim to be. Silence trains patience without noise. It forces you to stop relying on feelings and start relying on commitment. It teaches you to worship Allah even when your heart feels empty, your mind feels confused, and your situation feels unfair. That is real faith. Allah knows that if He explained everything to you, you would depend on explanations instead of trust. You would obey selectively. You would negotiate submission. Silence removes negotiation. You either submit or you don't. And here's something people rarely admit. Silence exposes entitlement. Some people don't want Allah. They want answers. They want signs. They want guarantees. When silence comes, frustration reveals that their relationship with Allah was transactional. Allah does not reward entitlement. He refines it out of you. Silence also protects you. If Allah revealed every step of the process, fear would overwhelm you. If He showed you how much you still needed to change, you might give up. So He keeps quiet and works gradually, invisibly, precisely. Just because you can't hear Allah doesn't mean He isn't acting. Just because you don't feel Him doesn't mean He isn't near. Growth often happens in places you can't measure or track. The most dangerous response to silence is rebellion, complaining about Allah, abandoning discipline, cutting corners in obedience. That response delays rebuilding. It extends the silence. The strongest response is consistency. Pray without emotion. Obey without excitement. Trust without clarity. That level of faith cannot be faked, and it cannot be developed without silence. When Allah finally speaks again, through relief, clarity, or change, you won't just be thankful. You'll be different, stronger, quieter, more grounded, less reactive. Silence didn't mean Allah left you. It meant He was shaping you without distractions. And when that process is complete, you'll realize something important. The silence didn't weaken your faith. It proved it. 4. Pain exposes who you really trust. Pain doesn't change who you are. That's a comforting lie people tell themselves. Pain exposes who you already were beneath comfort. When life was stable, you could hide behind routines, people, distractions, and excuses. When pain arrives, all of that is stripped away, and what remains is the truth of your trust. You said Allah was enough. Pain asks you to prove it. When pressure hits, where do you turn first? Do you turn to Allah with humility, or do you turn to people with complaints? Do you increase discipline, or do you escape into distraction? Do you lower your head in submission, or do you raise your voice in irtirad? Pain reveals the direction of your dependence. If your first instinct is panic, it means your sense of safety was tied to control. If your first instinct is bitterness, it means your expectations were misplaced. If your first instinct is sin, it means comfort was doing more spiritual work than faith ever did. Allah allows pain to stay long enough to show you this clearly, not to shame you, but to correct you. Many people claim trust in Allah while leaning heavily on people, systems, money, routine, or approval. As long as those supports remain, the illusion survives. Pain removes those supports one by one. Suddenly people don't respond. Money doesn't fix it. Plans fail. Distractions stop working. And now you are face to face with Allah without buffers. That moment is uncomfortable because it's honest. Pain forces you to answer a question you've been avoiding. It's when everything else collapses, who do you actually rely on? Not who you say you rely on. Who you run to when fear hits your chest and certainty disappears. This is why some people grow bitter during hardship, while others grow grounded. The difference is not strength, it's trust alignment. Those who trusted people more than Allah feel betrayed and angry. Those who trusted comfort more than Allah feel lost and anxious. Those who trusted outcomes more than obedience feel confused and resentful. Pain doesn't create these reactions, it uncovers them. Allah lets the pain continue until the lesson is learned. You can't fake reliance under pressure. You either submit or resist. You either return to Allah or spiral away from Him. There is no neutral response to pain. And here's the part people don't like hearing. Sometimes Allah keeps you in pain because you keep running to the wrong place. You want relief, but you refuse redirection. You want ease, but you won't detach from what caused the weakness. So the pain stays, not as punishment, but as insistence. Allah is not interested in temporary calm if it preserves long-term misalignment. Pain also strips arrogance. When you're hurting, you realize how little control you actually have, how fragile your plans were, how dependent you truly are. That realization is dangerous for the ego, but necessary for the soul. The heart that truly trusts Allah does something different in pain. It slows down instead of panicking. It reflects instead of reacting. It obeys even when emotions protest. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It means the pain doesn't decide behavior. This is where rebuilding quietly begins. Not when the pain ends, but when your response changes. When you stop using pain as an excuse to disobey. When you stop blaming Allah for what He is trying to fix. When you stop demanding answers and start adjusting actions. Pain is a mirror. It shows you where your trust actually lives. And once you see that truth, you have a choice. You can either return fully to Allah, or you can keep leaning on what will fail you again. Allah exposes misplaced trust because He wants to relocate it, not to break you further, but to anchor you properly. Once your trust shifts, the pain no longer owns you. It becomes instruction, and instruction, when accepted, is the beginning of relief, even before circumstances change. 5. Allah humiliates before He elevates. This is the lesson most people reject, because it attacks the ego directly. Nobody wants to hear that humiliation can be mercy. Nobody wants to accept that embarrassment, failure, and being lowered in the eyes of people might be part of divine care. But if you look honestly at how Allah raises His servants, you'll see a pattern. Elevation is almost always preceded by humbling. Allah does not elevate arrogance. He destroys it first. If Allah lifted you while pride was still alive inside you, that pride would rot whatever blessing you received. It would turn success into entitlement, knowledge into arrogance, leadership into tyranny, recognition into self-worship. So before Allah raises you, He reduces you. This reduction is not about your worth. It's about your ego. Humiliation is how Allah detaches you from image, from reputation, from needing to look strong in front of people, from being addicted to praise, from measuring your value by how others see you. As long as those things control you, elevation would be dangerous. So Allah allows moments where you look weak, where plans fail publicly, where people misunderstand you, where respect disappears, where you feel small, exposed, and stripped of confidence. You call it humiliation. Allah calls it purification. Think clearly. When you are humbled, you stop pretending. You stop performing. You stop relying on applause. You stop speaking loudly about yourself. You become quieter, more reflective, more honest. Your relationship with Allah either deepens or it collapses. There is no middle ground. Humiliation reveals whether you worship Allah or your image. Some people, when humbled, grow bitter. They blame Allah. They blame people. They obsess over how unfair life is. That response shows the ego is still in control. And when the ego remains, elevation is delayed. Others respond differently. They lower their head. They accept correction. They detach from validation. They rebuild their inner world instead of their reputation. These are the people Allah prepares for something higher. Allah humiliates privately or publicly, depending on what you need. If your ego is subtle, the humbling is subtle. If your ego is loud, the humbling is loud. Either way, it is precise. Allah never humiliates randomly. He targets the exact place where pride lives. And here's the hard truth. Some failures had to happen before success so that success wouldn't destroy you. Some doors had to close publicly so that when doors open later, you don't forget who controls them. Some people had to stop respecting you so that you stop needing respect to function. If your obedience depends on dignity, it's not obedience. If your faith survives humiliation, it's real. Elevation without humility produces monsters. Elevation after humility produces leaders, servants, and people who carry blessings safely. Allah wants you clean before He makes you visible. This is why the humbling phase feels lonely. People leave. Voices quiet down. Support disappears. You're forced inward. You're forced toward Allah. You're forced to confront who you are without status, without reassurance, without praise. That isolation is not rejection, it's containment. Allah is shrinking your world so your heart can expand. He's lowering your voice so your inner discipline can speak. He's removing witnesses so your sincerity can grow. And once humility replaces arrogance, something shifts. You stop chasing elevation. You stop demanding recognition. You stop proving yourself. You become stable whether you're seen or unseen. That's when Allah raises you. Quietly at first. Gradually. Securely. And when elevation comes after humiliation, it doesn't intoxicate you. It doesn't make you reckless. It doesn't separate you from Allah. Because you remember exactly how low you were allowed to feel and how little control you truly had. Humiliation didn't destroy you. It prepared you. Allah lowers those He intends to lift permanently. And when He lifts them, they rise with humility, not arrogance, strong enough to hold what they've been given, and wise enough not to lose themselves in it. 6. The breaking is personal and precise. What you're going through is not generic suffering. It's not random hardship. And it's definitely not a sign that Allah lost control of the situation. The breaking you're experiencing is personal, targeted, and exact. Allah does not apply pressure blindly. He applies it where it will reshape you most effectively. This is where people make a critical mistake. They compare their test to someone else's. They look around and ask why others seem untouched while they're struggling. That comparison weakens faith because it assumes Allah works in bulk. He doesn't. Allah works individually. He knows what breaks one person and strengthens another. He knows where you're flexible and where you're rigid. He knows what needs force and what needs patience. Your test is designed for your specific weaknesses, not someone else's. What hurts you the most reveals what needed attention. If the breaking hit your relationships, then dependence was the issue. If it hit your plans, then control was the issue. If it hit your reputation, then ego was the issue. If it hit your finances, then attachment or fear was the issue. Allah does not guess, He diagnoses. People often say, "Why this pain?" The better question is, why does this pain work on me? Because Allah chose the exact pressure point that would produce change. Anything less wouldn't move you. Anything different wouldn't teach you. This level of difficulty is not evidence of cruelty. It's evidence of precision. Allah knows your limits better than you do. He knows how much pressure you can handle without breaking completely. That's why the hardship feels intense but survivable. It bends you without snapping you. It exhausts you without erasing you. If Allah intended to destroy you, you wouldn't still be standing. The fact that you're still functioning, still thinking, still questioning, still turning inward is proof that the process is controlled. Another uncomfortable truth: Allah doesn't always break what looks broken to you. He breaks what looks strong. Sometimes what appears functional on the outside is toxic on the inside. Stability can hide rot. Confidence can hide arrogance. Independence can hide a lack of reliance. Allah sees beneath appearances. So He disrupts what looks fine because it isn't fine at the core. This is why the breaking often feels unfair. From your perspective, things were working. From Allah's perspective, they were working against your long-term growth. He cares more about what you become than how comfortable you feel right now. And understand this clearly. The breaking continues until the lesson lands. If you resist, distract yourself, or numb the discomfort without reflection, the pressure doesn't disappear. It returns in another form. Not because Allah is harsh, but because the objective hasn't been met. Allah does not repeat lessons unnecessarily. Repetition means resistance. Precision also means timing. Allah breaks you when you're capable of rebuilding, not before. He waits until you have enough awareness, enough maturity, enough capacity to process what's happening. What feels sudden to you was timed perfectly by Him. You weren't ready earlier. You won't be left like this forever. The danger is misinterpreting the breaking as chaos instead of instruction. When you see it as chaos, you waste energy fighting reality. When you see it as instruction, you start adjusting behavior. You start removing what's weak. You start strengthening what matters. You stop asking for escape and start preparing for rebuilding. This is where responsibility shifts to you. Allah applies the pressure. You decide whether it refines or ruins you. The breaking is not meant to destroy your life. It's meant to destroy the flaws that would have destroyed your life later. Once those flaws are weakened, the pressure eases. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually as alignment improves. Nothing about this process is accidental. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is excessive. Allah knows exactly what He's doing with you. And when this phase ends, you won't just be relieved. You'll be different, more self-aware, less reactive, less attached, stronger in areas that used to collapse. That's the proof that the breaking was never meant to end you. It was meant to shape you precisely into someone who can carry what's coming next. 7. Rebuilding begins with submission, not questions. This is where most people fail the process. They survive the breaking. They endure the loss. They sit through the silence. They feel the pain, but they never actually rebuild because they stay stuck in questioning instead of submission. They keep asking why when Allah is waiting for what now? Why did this happen to me? Why did Allah take this away? Why is this so hard? Why am I suffering while others are fine? Those questions feel intelligent, but they delay growth. They keep you mentally circling the past instead of moving forward into responsibility. Allah does not rebuild people who stay trapped in interrogation mode. He rebuilds people who act. Submission is not emotional acceptance, it's behavioral alignment. You don't rebuild by understanding everything. You rebuild by obeying even when you don't understand. You rebuild by praying when clarity is absent, by staying disciplined when motivation is gone, by controlling your tongue when bitterness wants to speak, by choosing restraint when anger feels justified. This is the shift Allah is waiting for. As long as you demand explanations before obedience, you are still negotiating with Allah. Negotiation means the ego is alive, and as long as the ego is alive, rebuilding is impossible. Submission kills the ego quietly. Real submission looks boring from the outside. There are no dramatic emotions, no spiritual highs, no loud declarations, just consistency, just restraint, just showing up when nothing feels rewarding. This is why rebuilding takes time. Not because Allah is slow, but because submission has to become stable. Anyone can submit briefly under fear. Allah is waiting for submission that remains when fear fades and routine sets in. Many people confuse surrender with weakness. That's ignorance. Surrender is controlled strength. It's choosing obedience when rebellion would feel easier. It's staying aligned when shortcuts are available. It's refusing to let pain justify sin. Allah does not rebuild rebels. You can't disobey your way into elevation. You can't complain your way into clarity. You can't demand ease while resisting discipline. Rebuilding only starts when your actions align with your claim of faith. This is also where patience is redefined. Patience is not passive waiting. Patience is disciplined endurance. It's holding correct behavior under pressure. It's continuing obedience without guarantees. It's staying principled when the outcome is uncertain. That level of patience cannot be faked. It can only be developed through submission. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Allah already knows why this is happening. You don't need to. Your job is not to decode the plan. Your job is to become the kind of person the plan requires. When submission replaces questioning, something changes internally. Anxiety decreases not because problems disappear, but because resistance ends. You stop fighting reality and start working with it. You stop demanding fairness and start building resilience. This is when rebuilding accelerates. Not visibly at first. Externally, life may still look heavy. But internally, strength forms. Discipline sharpens. Faith becomes quieter but deeper. You stop reacting emotionally and start responding deliberately. And that's when Allah begins to add back. Not all at once. Not recklessly, carefully, securely. In ways that won't destroy you again. Rebuilding is not about returning to who you were before the breaking. That person was insufficient. Rebuilding is about becoming someone new, someone who can hold blessings without worshiping them, handle pressure without collapsing, and move forward without arrogance. Submission is the doorway. Once you walk through it, you don't need answers anymore. Your actions speak for your faith. And Allah responds to action far more than He responds to complaints. This is the final lesson. The breaking ends when obedience becomes natural again. Not forced, not emotional, not desperate, just steady. That's when rebuilding is no longer a process. It becomes your new foundation. If you've made it this far, understand this clearly. Nothing you went through was random, wasted, or out of control. The breaking wasn't chaos, it wasn't cruelty, and it wasn't Allah turning away from you. It was correction. Allah did not break you because you were weak. He broke what was weak inside you. He removed what you depended on so you would finally depend on Him. He silenced what distracted you so you could hear yourself. He humbled you so pride wouldn't poison what's coming next. You weren't being pushed backward. You were being stripped down to the foundation. Most people never reach this stage. They stay comfortable, distracted, and spiritually shallow. They live and die without being challenged deeply enough to change. If you were broken, it's because Allah saw potential worth refining. But understand this, rebuilding is not automatic. Pain alone does not elevate. Loss alone does not purify. Silence alone does not strengthen. What determines the outcome is your response. If you resist, the cycle repeats. If you submit, the process completes. Allah does not need you to understand everything. He needs you to stay aligned. He needs discipline when emotions are unstable, obedience when answers are absent, character when circumstances are unfair. That is real faith. And when Allah finishes rebuilding you, you will not return to your old life. You will not return to old dependencies, old weaknesses, or old illusions. You will walk differently, think differently, trust differently. The pain will make sense later. The loss will reveal its purpose. The silence will feel like protection. Until then, stay steady. Because Allah does not break people He plans to abandon. He breaks those He plans to rebuild properly. And when the rebuilding is complete, you will realize something powerful. The breaking didn't ruin you. It saved you.